Hello everybody and welcome. It's a very exciting time right now. We've got a new draft format on the horizon, so I hope you're ready to take a look at what Outlaws of Thunder Junction Limited is all about today. My name is Alex. I'm a limited content creator. You might know me from Limited Level Ups, my YouTube channel and podcast feed, where I put a big time focus on helping you succeed at limited magic. So that's what we're gonna do today. I picked up some cards today you should definitely keep your eye out for if you're going to pre-release or if you're just jumping into your first few drafts of the format. We're gonna be going color by color, so let's jump in. All right, let's start with white. Holy cow is what you might think when you read this card, but it's also the card's name. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/2 flyer with flying and flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and you scry 1. That's just so much for your 3 mana. You know, long gone are the days of Windrake being good and limited. We kind of have to buff up the power level of our old 3 mana 2/2 flyer, and this one definitely passes the bar. I can see myself first picking this card quite a bit. Not only is this card just good on rate, but there's also a theme in blue-white of not casting spells on your turn. So a flash creature really helps to do that. So definitely one that I would not be sad to pick early in a pack. Funny enough, our next card also made me think, holy cow, we got Mystical Tether. This is 2 and a white for an enchantment, and you can cast it as though it had flash. So again, that flash theme coming up again if you pay 2 more, so 5 mana. And when it enters the battlefield, you exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until the Mystical Tether leaves the battlefield. If you played Murders the Karlov Manor, you're going to be very familiar with Makeshift Binding, and this is a bit of a variation on that. Loses the 2 life, gains the instant speed. I think it's still going to be just about as good as Makeshift Binding was, and that was a top common. The last white common I want to talk about is actually a reprint. This is Take Up the Shield. It's 1 and a white for an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. So we last saw this card in Dominaria United, and it was one of the top commons there. It's a little bit easy to overlook. I think when you're just going through a new set, you look at a combat trick and you go, okay, that's a combat trick. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's a little bit better than it looks. More times than not, usually I feel like the combat tricks these days are a little bit better than they look. And this one is just great. It kind of just does it all. It protects against removal spells, really helps you win combats. The life gain is a big deal here, so don't overlook this one. This is a combat trick I would be happy playing multiple copies of. Now onto an uncommon here, and I would not be surprised if this is white's best uncommon. Lassoed by the Law. This is 3 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters, you exile a non-land permanent in opponent controls until this leaves, and you make a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Only has a sorcery though. So this card is great. It comes in, gets rid of something, and leaves a body behind. Anytime your removal spell comes with an additional resource, a little bit of life gain, drawing a card, a creature is often one of the better things you can get. It's gonna be phenomenal, and this actually highlights one of the little themes running through the set. These mercenary tokens, which are really cool. They're, as this card says, 1/1s that tap to give something +1/+0. So if the board gets a little bit stalled, maybe you're playing an aggro deck and you can't quite punch through, you have a few of these tokens lying around, you can 1 by 1 slowly send in your small creature. You know, you send in your 2/2, it becomes a 5/2, and your opponent goes, okay, I have to block it. Eventually you kind of start attritioning your opponent out. But yeah, Lassoed by the Law, fantastic card, and do think these mercenary tokens are quite strong as well. So keep your eye out for anything that makes a mercenary token. Let's move on to blue, shall we? So we've got Loan Shark as the first blue common I want to talk about. This is 3 and a blue for a 3/4, and it says when Loan Shark enters the battlefield, if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn, you draw a card. And it's our first instance of a new mechanic here, Plot, and it has a plot cost of 3 and a blue. And what Plot says is you may pay its plot cost, exile this card from your hand, cast that as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. And sometimes the plot cost and the mana cost of the creature are going to be different. In the case of Loan Shark here, they're the same, both 4 mana. So I want to just take a second to talk about what Plot is doing, because it's not exactly obvious on first read. A lot of the mechanics in this set really key off this Plot mechanic, exiling cards from your hand and then casting them later. So in blue-white, for example, I mentioned that it has a theme of not casting spells on your turn. I didn't specify though that it actually has a theme of not casting spells from your hand on your turn. So if you've got a bunch of plot cards, you can plot them on your turn, cast them from exile later, and then your cards like Gem Lightfoot are gonna trigger, you get a bunch of engines going, start drawing a bunch of cards, which then of course draws you into more plot cards, and just keep going. And Loan Shark here specifically is referencing what the blue-red deck is doing. Blue-red is all about casting your second spell in a turn, and Plot, once again, helps you do that. So what you're gonna do very often with this Loan Shark, for example, is plot it on turn 4, and then on turn 5, cast a 5-drop, cast your Loan Shark, you get your card, your other things that care about when you've cast 2 spells or your second spell on turn get the trigger. I think that game of figuring out how to sequence that stuff is going to be really fun. And just one thing to point out about Plot is it's got some inherent tension with itself, right? You've got Loan Shark here, which is a powerful card. If you just had a 3-mana 3/4 that drew a card when it entered, that would be very, very strong. It's not quite that. You have to take turn 4 off to be able to have the privilege of drawing a card on the next turn. So some games you're going to be able to do that, right? Your opponent's maybe not off to the fastest start. You can take the time, plot this on turn 4. You don't mind not affecting the board. But some games you're going to have to make the decision, hey, I don't get to draw my extra card, but at least I get to block when my opponent's beating me down. We're gonna come back to Plot. There's a few other cards I picked out that use Plot in a slightly different way. So this is one that if you're going to pre-release this weekend or gonna jump into a few drafts, really just think about how Plot plays. And when you're looking at your cards, like, when am I gonna wanna plot these? Why do I wanna plot? Do I pay offs for plotting? It's kind of a mechanic that isn't super spelled out on the card, but one that I think once you start to understand why you want it and where you want it, it really does pay you off. Seize the Secrets is up next. Divination Lovers Rejoice. This is 3 and a blue for a sorcery at common. You draw 2 cards, but it costs 1 less to cast a spell if you've committed a crime this turn, which brings us to another mechanic. Committing a crime means targeting your opponent's anything, basically. Targeting them. So if you cast a discard spell or a burn spell at their face, you've committed a crime. If you target a creature they control with a removal spell, you've committed a crime. If you've targeted cards in their graveyard, you've committed a crime. Committing a crime even counts cards on the stack. So if you go to counter a spell they control or copy a spell that's on the stack, that counts as committing a crime. There's even lands in this set that help you commit a crime. When they come in, they deal 1 damage to target opponent. So it's not going to be very difficult to commit a crime. Apparently crime is just all over Thunder Junction, and so it's not really going to be a matter of can I build my deck in a way that commits crimes. It's more going to be an in-game puzzle to solve where you're like, okay, well, I want to cast my removal spell so I can get my committing a crime payoffs, for example, making my Seize the Secrets cheaper, but maybe I want to save this removal spell for a better threat. Maybe there's nothing on the board that I really want to kill. Should I get my discount on my Seize the Secrets, or should I just save this removal spell for later? Sort of like Plot, actually. I think there's going to be a puzzle to solve in game, figuring out how you want to sequence things, which I think leads to a lot of really good gameplay generally. All right, our next blue common to talk about here shows off yet another mechanic. We've got Phantom Interference, which is a single blue mana. It's an instant, but it has the spree mechanic, which says choose 1 or more additional costs. So when you cast a card that has spree, there's a bit of a list of different modes you can tack onto the card. So for Phantom Interference, you can pay 3 additional mana on top of your blue to make a 2/2 white spirit token with flying. There's also the option to pay 1 to turn this into a counter spell. So if you pay 1, you tack on counter target spell unless this controller pays 2. And of course, you can mix and match. You can do both of these. You can do only one of them. There's certain spree cards with 3 modes, so you can choose any amount of those modes. It really just scales with as much mana as you have. And this card here, Phantom Interference, I think is quite strong. These 2 mana counter unless they pay 2 counter spells generally have been pretty good in limited recently. They kind of fall off in the late game where you're not going to be able to counter much because your opponent's just going to have a bunch of mana. So being able to make a flyer as a buyout is pretty nice. And on turn 5, if you can nab something with this, if you pay 5 mana, your opponent taps out for a 4-drop or a 5-drop, you get the full I make a 2/2 flyer and counter your spell. That's a huge swing in the game. I think your opponent's going to be very, very upset when that happens. I think they're going to feel like they had a crime committed against them, and they actually did, because again, committing a crime cares about things on the stack as well. All right, for blues uncommon, we got a really cool one, a really sweet one, and a very powerful one. It's great when cards are cool, sweet, and powerful. Outlaw Stitcher. This is 3 and a blue for a 1/4. It says when it enters the battlefield, you make a 2/2 black and blue zombie rogue creature token. Then you put 2 +1/+1 counters on that token for each spell you've cast other than your first. And this card also has Plot for 4 and a blue. So another way that you can use Plot is sort of this, let me cast as many spells as I can in a single turn, right? It's just like you're building up all these Plot cards, putting them all in exile. Now, of course, you can't put too many because again, you have to affect the board. But this game, this puzzle to figure out of how many things can I get in exile to make an 8/8, a 10/10 zombie. If you just cast Outlaw Stitcher, just face up, just on turn 4, it's a good card. It's a 1/4 plus a 2/2 token. That's a lot for your 4 mana, especially in blue. But if you can have that one big turn where you get to cast 2 Plot cards that were in exile, then cast this, you're really doing it. I think this is another really fun thing to strive for. You know, I'm sure you're gonna see screenshots of people be like, look, I have a 10/10, a 12/12 zombie for my Outlaw Stitcher. So one to keep your eye on for sure. And again, even if you're not doing the tippity top of the awesome, you don't have that screenshot equity, it's still a good card if you just cast it. All right, that brings us on to black. And the first 2 black commons I wanna talk about are As expected, 2 black removal spells. Desert's Dew is one of them here. 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. It gets an additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each desert you control. So brings us to another theme that you're going to see scattered throughout the set. There's a handful of cards that care about deserts, and there's also a handful of deserts in this set. That cycle of dual lands that I mentioned that commits a crime, pings your opponent when they come in, they also happen to be deserts. Consuming Ashes, another pretty solid removal spell here. 4 black for an instant, exile target creature. If it had mana value 3 or less, you get to Surveil 2. Nice little bit of value. And a bit of a variation on an old friend here. We have Vault Plunderer, which is kind of like Phyrexian Rager. So this is 3 and a black for a 3/1 that when it enters the battlefield, target player draws a card and loses 1 life. Even a little bit better, because you can target your opponent with this. If you really want to commit a crime or your opponent's on 1 life, you can just finish them off with this thing. And this card's going to be awesome. I do imagine this is going to be black's top common, a 3 mana creature, 3/1 that comes in, draws a card. Really, really strong. I've got 2 black uncommons here that I want to talk about. Hollow Marauder being the first one. I think this one's really good, and I imagine it might be a little bit underrated going in for the first little while, because it's got a pretty hefty mana cost if you don't read the rest of the text box, and it can kind of be a little bit tricky to really parse, like, okay, how much is this actually going to cost? So this is a 7 mana, 6 and a black, 4/2 flyer, but it costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. And there is self-mill in black. There's a 2/2 lifelink creature that comes in and mills for 2. I imagine you're going to be able to cast Hollow Marauder on turn 5, sometimes even turn 4 in some games. And when it enters the battlefield, any number of target opponents each discard a card. Okay, that's already good. For each of those opponents who didn't discard a card with mana value 4 or greater, draw a card. And even when they do discard an expensive card, well, that's an expensive, powerful card that they discard most likely. Imagine recurring this too, right? You play this, they kill it or trade it off. You then buy it back, you can do it again. I've got my eye on this one. I think this one's going to be really strong. And then here's one for the Blood Artist lovers out there, Rakish Crew. This is a 2 and a black enchantment that comes in, makes one of those mercenary tokens, and it says whenever an outlaw you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And here's another little mechanic or sub-theme that we haven't talked about yet. Outlaws. Outlaws are assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks. Those are not hard to come by. It's going to be a lot of the creatures in your deck. So really cool card, kind of a callback to Bastion of Remembrance if anybody played Ikoria, and that was a great card in that format. Red card time. We're going to start with Prickly Pear. Great name, by the way. This is 2 and a red for a 2/2 plant mercenary. When it enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 mercenary token. This card is the latest entry in a type of card we've seen be very, very good time and time again, which is a well-statted creature that comes in 2 parts. It's a solid creature that comes with a little friend, Preening Champion, Dunland Crabane, Chimney Rabble, Insight Source as a recent example from Murders of Karlov Manor. And I think this one, not going to be any different, going to be a very good card. Irascible Wolverine's an interesting one. This is 2 and a red for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you can play it, and it's got plot for the same cost as mana cost, 2 and a red. So this is another way that they've kind of used plot, where this is a card you don't really want to cast on turn 3, or you don't want to cast when you don't have all your mana untapped, because if you play this on turn 3, well, you're not going to be able to play anything off of it. Play it on turn 4, well, you're most likely not going to be able to play anything off of it, although you can play a land off of it, so that's cool. What you generally want to do with this is plot it on 1 turn, and then cast it as the first spell on a 2nd turn, so that you get to flip over, let's say a 5-drop, and still be able to cast it. And when it comes down to it, when you do jump through those hoops, it's a 3 mana 3/2 that draws you a card, and that's a good card, so don't overlook this one. And then two uncommons that I thought were kind of funny to call out here. Cunning Coyote and Resilient Roadrunner. I'm sure you mostly all get this reference here, and it is a funny reference, but at the same time, these are just good cards. 2/2 for 2 with haste. That's above the going rate generally. We don't always get 2/2 for 2 with haste at uncommon. Usually that's like reserved for rare, and these have additional abilities too. So I think these are not going to be the most fantastic uncommons in the world, but you're going to be happy to have them in your deck. And then another red uncommon I want to call out here, Take for a Ride. This is 3 and a red for a sorcery. You can cast this card as though it had flash if you committed a crime this turn, and you gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. And if you haven't played with an instant speed version of this effect before, you're in for a treat, because what you can do with this is steal something in combat. You know, your opponent attacks with a bunch of stuff, you steal their biggest thing, so that thing's no longer attacking you, and then you block their second biggest thing. So not only do you not take as much damage as you thought you were going to, but you get to eat one of your opponent's creatures. Even better, if you can take their 3/3 and they have another 3/3 attacking you, you can just make those trades. So it's just a clean 2-for-1. And last, but certainly not least, is green. And I kind of want to hype green up a little bit. I think green's got a lot of really good commons this time. I've picked out a few of them here, but there's even more that I was like, should I talk about that one? Because that one's really good too. And I didn't have time for all of them, but I'll just kind of rapid fire some of them here. Cactarantula, another cool name here, is a 6-mana 6/5 that costs 1 less if you control a desert. It's got reach, and when it becomes the target of a spell your opponent controls, you can draw a card. All right, pretty good. We've got Hard Bristle Bandit. This is 2 mana for a 1/1, tap to add a mana of any color, so just a good 2 mana dork. And when you commit a crime, you untap this card. Another pretty good card. Patient Naturalist, 3 mana for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards, and you put a land from among the milled cards into your hand. And if you can't, you create a treasure token. Say it with me. Another pretty good card. One that's maybe a little bit less obvious is Bristlepack Sentry. This is 2 mana for a 3/3 defender. It says as long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Bristlepack Sentry can attack as though it didn't have defender. And there's a very important word that isn't on this card: another. So if you can just get a +1/+1 counter on the Sentry, or pump it with a mercenary token, this thing enables itself and it can attack. And if you've got like a 4 mana 2/2 creature, yeah, it's pretty good. And then the green uncommon I want to highlight here talks about the last mechanic that we didn't get a chance to talk about, which is saddle. So this is Stubborn Burrow Fiend. This is 2 mana for a 2/2. Whenever Stubborn Burrow Fiend becomes saddled for the first time each turn, mill 2 cards. Then it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. The saddle cost is 2. And what saddle says is tap any number of other creatures you control with power 2 or more. This mount, this is creature type mount, becomes saddled until end of turn. Saddle only as a sorcery. So you can kind of think of these mount creatures like vehicles, but instead of turning into a creature, the creature gets a little bit better. And the last thing I want to leave us with today is the bonus sheet, or I should say bonus sheets, because there's actually 2 kind of bonus sheets in the set. One is the breaking news bonus sheet, and the theme for this bonus sheet is cards that commit a crime. And it's going to be very relevant to us limited players, because what are cards that commit crimes? Well, mostly removal spells. This bonus sheet also has some very, very, very powerful additions. Oko, Thief of Crowns, that's right, OG Oko is actually on this bonus sheet, so you have the chance to open and play with, or face and hopefully defeat Oko. There's also Mana Drain, just one of the most busted counter spells of all time. Not all the cards are of this power level, of course, but just kind of want to highlight some of the really exciting stuff you can open. And you're gonna find 1 card from that breaking news bonus sheet in every single pack. But once in a while, there's gonna be a card in the pack from something called the Big Score, which is almost like an additional bonus sheet. And these are standard legal cards, so a little bit of a cool bonus there. You can actually play these in standard. Also pretty darn powerful, a lot of them. We've got a new sword, for example, Sword of Wealth and Powers. Again, you're not gonna see these ones as often. They're not once per pack, but definitely something to keep an eye out for. And that's gonna bring us to the end of our video here. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you liked this little look in at Thunder Junction Limited. Just a few callouts here. You can play the set on Arena starting April 16th. The set releases fully in paper on the 19th, but you can also play your pre-release events April 12th to the 18th. And there's also the streamer event on April 10th on Twitch if you want to watch your favorite streamer play with the new cards. And that'll do it. Bye, everybody.